Hi, I'm Pastor Kerry. Before we get started, there are a few things I want to encourage you to have on hand. First, I want to encourage you to have a set of the sermon notes, and if you don't already have them, you can go to the link that's right down below the video. It'll take you to a place where you can print a set of the sermon notes for yourself. I also want to encourage you to have some communion elements. You want to have some bread or a cracker, you want to have some juice or some wine, and if you don't have juice or wine, probably any beverage would suffice. But you'll want to have those communion elements because here in about 20 minutes, when we get to the end of the sermon, we'll move right into a time of communion with you. So if you need any of those things, then I would encourage you to pause the video right now. Grab whatever you need. Once everything's ready, then go ahead and resume the playback. So I think I've told you this before, but at the start of the pandemic, back in 2020, my family adopted a couple of rescue dogs. And if you're thinking, oh my goodness, Pastor Kerry, I didn't know that you had a heart for rescue dogs. That's wonderful. Well, let me be very clear. It is not me who has the heart for rescue dogs. It is my wife and it is my children who have a heart for rescue dogs. I was the Grinch who was kind of being a stick in the mud about getting the dogs, but we got the dogs and they have become members of our family over the past 3.5 years. Now, one of the dogs is named Roxy, and she is this little spitfire of a dog. She's not tiny. She's a small dog. She probably weighs about 35 pounds. But she is absolutely large and in charge when it comes to running things around our house. She is our watchdog. As a matter of fact, she has found a position for herself on the stairs that go from the main level up to the upper level, and she can position herself about halfway up on the stairs so that she can look through the front window out to the street and she can see if there are any other dogs walking by, because if there are any other dogs that have the audacity to walk past our house, Roxy is going to make sure that they know not to come up onto our property. As soon as she sees a dog passing by, she loses her mind. She starts barking like crazy. And then what she does is she then promptly runs from the front of the house where she's seen the dog through the front window. She runs around to the back of the house. She goes through the doggy door, then she goes around to the side where the dog first is coming past, and she barks and barks and barks and barks at the dog as the dog passes on that side. Then as the dog starts to go across that side, then she runs around to the other side of the house, and then she continues to bark and bark and bark at the dog as that dog and its owner, assumedly it's being walked by an owner, continues to walk it past. And then after the dog is gone, then she goes back into the house. She goes up to the middle of the stairs and she positions herself on the stairs once again so she can watch for the next dog. And lather, rinse, repeat. I mean, that's what she does all day long whenever she is on guard duty, which is any time of the day when the sun is out and when dogs are walking by. Now, we also adopted another dog, and his name is Bo. Now, Bo is about twice the size of Roxy. But where Roxy is this fierce little spitfire of a guard dog, Bo is kind of this lazy old man of a dog. He's kind of a cowardly lion of a dog. And look, we love Bo. We love Roxy. We love both of them. But they are as different as night and day. Roxy has made it her mission to make sure that any dogs that, again, have the temerity to walk past the front of our house, that those dogs know not to step one step towards our house, because Roxy barks and barks and makes sure that they know that they are not welcome. Bo, on the other hand, doesn't care. Bo, all he ever wants to do is have somebody petting him. So he follows around my wife, or follows around my daughter, or follows me around, or whoever's home. He's just going to follow them around and make sure that somebody is petting him at all times. He doesn't care if a dog walks by. I mean, there could be an army of dogs that could converge on our house. They could come right up to the front door. Heck, they could probably walk through the front door. And Bo, the only concern that he would have is don't distract my owner, as in my wife, or don't distract my owner as in my daughter, or don't distract my owner as in my son or me from petting me. As long as whoever is the human in the house at the time, as long as that human continues to pet Bo and lavish and focus all of their attention on Bo, there could be 1,000 dogs that could walk into our house and Bo really wouldn't care, as long as those dogs didn't get in his space and didn't come between him and his human. And the reason that I'm boring you with this story about our dogs, who are as different as night and day with our dogs Roxy and Bo, is because in the lectionary passage that we're going to be taking a look at for this morning, it is going to be talking about the idea of keeping watch, something that Roxy does really well and something that Bo couldn't care less about. And so, without any further ado, let's take a look at that lectionary passage. Now, it just so happens that this Sunday is the first Sunday of Advent. And Advent, of course, is the season leading up to Christmas, the season leading up to the celebration of the birth of Jesus. So, I'm sure that this lectionary passage, if it's going to be the first passage for the season of Advent, we're going to be talking about Mary and Joseph, or we're going to be talking about maybe John the Baptist, or maybe donkeys and little drummer boys. I'm sure, right? That's what we're going to be taking a look at, correct? It's probably from Matthew chapter 1 or Luke chapter 1, or, the start of one of the Gospels, surely, right? Well, let's find out. This is our lectionary Gospel reading for December the 3rd of 2023. It's Mark 13. Mark 13, verses 24 through 37. Now, this is the red letters, so this is Jesus speaking. And Jesus says, "But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the four ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now, learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether it is in evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch." May God bless the reading of the powerful word. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, gosh, Pastor Kerry, that's the first reading for the season of Advent, I was expecting Mary and Joseph. I was expecting maybe John the Baptist. I was expecting maybe something about stable animals and mangers, and this doesn't include any of those things. And you're right. It doesn't include any of those things. As a matter of fact, Mark chapter 13 is at the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. It is during the Passion Week. It's during Holy Week, the week that Jesus was in Jerusalem, just days before his crucifixion, that Jesus spoke these words. So an interesting question then becomes, why this passage? If this is the start of the preparation for the birth of Jesus, why are we getting some words from Jesus from the very end of his life? Well, hold on to that question. Maybe at the end of this I can suggest an answer to you, and I'll say right up front, I have not talked to the scholars who assembled the lectionary, so all I can do is give you my best somewhat educated guess as to why they chose this particular passage, and I can tell you that in the next several weeks we will be talking about John the Baptist and Mary and Joseph and mangers and donkeys. and shepherds and angels. But this week, for some reason, we're taking a snapshot from the end of Jesus' life. I'll tell you why I think that was. We'll come back to that at the end. But what I want to do right now, very quickly, is I want to talk through this passage. Now, as I've already said, this was something that Jesus said at the end of his life. This was something that he shared with the disciples while he was in Jerusalem. This is just days before the crucifixion. Jesus knows that his crucifixion is going to be happening in just a matter of days, but the disciples clearly did not know that Jesus' crucifixion was just a few days away at this point. But Jesus had been talking to the disciples about the day of the Lord. And so, knowing that Jesus has been talking to the disciples about the day of the Lord, now suddenly this will probably make a little bit more sense. Jesus, in this lectionary reading, says, in those days, the sun will be darkened, the stars will fall from the sky. And at this point, Jesus is quoting the book of Isaiah from the Old Testament. And Jesus then says in verse 26, at that time people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Now this certainly sounds like a reference to the second coming. This certainly sounds like a reference to the day of the Lord in that sense. You've heard me say before that anytime you see the three-word phrase, Son of Man, that is a reference to the Messiah. So Jesus says at that time people will see the Son of Man. People will see the Messiah coming in the clouds with great power and glory. He will send his angels to gather his elect from the four winds and from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more about that here in just a few minutes. But then Jesus gives kind of a semi-parable in this next paragraph in verses 28 through 30. Jesus is talking now about the fig tree, and this isn't the formal parable of the fig tree. This is just a case where Jesus is using the fig tree as an example. He says, you know how fig trees are. He says, in the spring, when you see that all of a sudden that the twigs on the end of the branches are starting to get tender, and suddenly the buds are coming out and the leaves are coming out, what do you know? Well, you know that summer is just around the corner, that the growing season is about to arrive. And Jesus is saying, so just as you can read those signs, Jesus is saying, I need you to read the signs in the world around you as well. And again, referring to the day of the Lord, Jesus says, about that day, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son. So Jesus is saying, he's saying, even I don't know when the day of the Lord is going to take place. Jesus says in verse 32, only God, the Father, knows when the day of the Lord is going to happen. And so Jesus' response to the disciples is, be on guard, be alert. So that's like an owner of a house goes away, and the owner of the house could come back at any time. And so when he leaves people with their responsibilities, when they come back, they better have those responsibilities fulfilled. They need to keep watch, Jesus says at the very end of verse 34, which keep watch also happens to be the title of our sermon today. Says then again in verse 35, therefore keep watch. There's that two-word phrase again, because you don't know when the owner of the house will come back. And now clearly Jesus is talking about himself. Jesus says, you don't know when I'm going to come back. Evening, dawn, midnight, rooster crows, whenever. He says, don't let the Son of Man, don't let me find you sleeping. When I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. There's that word watch again. So, what do we make of all of this? First of all, let's just talk about the timeless truths that Jesus conveys to the disciples in this passage. Conveyed to his disciples 2,000 years ago, conveys to us 2,000 years later by extension as his modern-day disciples. The first timeless truth that's conveyed in this passage is this. As disciples, we can trust that we will be taken care of. As disciples, we can trust that we will be taken care of. And the reason that I think it's important for us to acknowledge that is because I know a lot of people who are disciples, people who are Christians, people who are Christ followers, and they worry, and they get stressed out, and they get anxious about the day of the Lord, or Judgment Day, or whatever we want to call it. They get worried about that. And I want to point out to you what Jesus says. Again, in verse 27, I told you we'd come back and talk more about it. Verse 27, it says that on the day of the Lord, he will send his angels and gather his elect. Gather his elect. Do you know who his elect is? That's us. That's those who are disciples. That's those who are Christ followers. That's those who are Christians. We are the elect. He will send his angels and gather the elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth, to the ends of the heavens. So we're going to be taken care of. We don't have anything to worry about. And so, friends, that is good news. The next time you hear, one of your fellow Christians that are stressing out about this or expressing anxiety about this, just point out this passage to them and remind them what they should already know, and they probably do already know, that we are going to be taken care of. So that is the first timeless truth this passage has for us. The second is this. As disciples, we should always keep watch and always be prepared. As disciples, we should always keep watch and we should always be prepared. What's the Boy Scout motto? Be prepared. That's exactly right. Be prepared. And that's what Jesus was telling the disciples in this passage. Look at all the times that he said to the disciples, be on guard, be alert, keep watch. Verse 33, be on guard, be alert. Verse 34, keep watch. Verse 35, keep watch. Verse 37, I say to everyone, watch. And again, the sermon title, keep watch. The point is that we are supposed to have our eyes open. We're supposed to not let anything sneak up on us. We're not supposed to have anything surprise us. That's the reason I told you the story earlier about our two rescue dogs, Roxy and Bo. Roxy is always on watch. God bless her. Probably far more than she needs to be, but she is always on watch. And that's one of the things that I respect about her. I don't love it when she starts barking like crazy and when she runs out and she starts barking like a crazy dog at the tiniest chihuahua passing our house. But again, I respect that and I appreciate that, even if it's a little bit loud on the ears at times. And friends, Jesus was trying to say to the disciples 2,000 years ago, be ready, be alert, be prepared, and keep watch. And so hopefully that's what we're doing with the world around us. We're keeping watch. That is the second timeless truth the passage has for us. The third timeless truth is this. As disciples, we can trust that there is always a greater plan in motion. As disciples, we can trust that there's always a greater plan in motion. There's one thing that is made very clear by Jesus from the start of this passage to the end, is that God has a greater plan. And friends, this book is the story of the greater plan that God has always had for you, for me, for all of us, for all of humanity. This book is the story of that greater plan. And there are so many examples that I could give you of how that plan began to be revealed, even in the Garden of Eden, when God called Abraham and said, Abraham, go into the land that I'm going to show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and all people on earth will be blessed through you. And then we continue through the New Testament, and we see where David becomes the king. And we hear the promise that the Messiah is going to be a descendant of David. Then we continue into the New Testament, and we arrive at the season of Advent. and again, in coming weeks, we are going to go, instead of to Mark 13, the very end of the gospel, we're going to go to the beginning of the Gospels. We're going to go to the first chapters of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we're going to hear the beginning of this story. Today, we're kind of taking a look at the end of the story. And so, friends, one of the things that I told you is that we should probably discuss what were the what were they thinking? What were they thinking? And so here's my educated guess. Again, I've never read anything that talks about how the people who put the lectionary together, how they designed it, but my slightly educated guess is that they were trying to say to you and to me and to all of us at the beginning of the season of Advent to have our eyes open. Because sometimes we get so busy as we go through this Christmas season, don't we? We're stressed out, we've got way too many things going on, too much to try to keep track of, and I think that the people who put together the lectionary, before they talked about Mary and Joseph and angels and shepherds and mangers, I think that they just wanted to remind you and me that it's important for us just to simply have our eyes open and for us to keep watch. I think that's what this is all about. And so I want to challenge you today, as we go through the season of Advent, I want to challenge you to be watching. And I want to encourage you in the next quiet time that you have with God. I want you to say to God, God, I want you to show me something during this Advent season. Sincerely, I really want you to do this. And I want you to know that I'm going to do this as well. As busy as I am, as spread incredibly thin as I might be, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say to God, God, I want you to show me something, and I promise you I'm going to do my very best to be like Roxy, not like Bo. I'm going to try to be like Roxy, and I'm going to try to be watching, God, watching for whatever you want to show me during this Advent season. And as we prepare now to transition to our time of communion, I also just want to remind you that when Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, before Jesus went to seminary, before Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said to the disciples what? He said, hey, I want you to stay right here and I want you to keep watch. And what happened? They fell asleep. And he said, good grief. And he said, try again. And so Jesus went and prayed more and came back and they were asleep a second time. Do you remember this part of the story? And he was like, you guys, aren't you listening? And then Jesus went and prayed a third time. And he came back and they were asleep again. And at that point, you know what had happened? Judas had showed up with a bunch of Roman soldiers. Isn't that a crazy part of the whole story? And so, friends, we know that what happened after that. Jesus was arrested, but again, it was all part of God's plan. And as we said, as disciples, we can trust that there's always a greater plan in motion, even with the Roman soldiers who showed up and arrested Jesus. That was a part of Jesus' journey to the cross. And friends, I'm out of time. The video is going to cut off here in just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and read the words of institution, and then I want you to go ahead and partake of your communion after the video cuts me off. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way after supper he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. So right now I want you to grab your communion elements as I grab mine. And even as the video shuts off, I want you to go ahead and partake of your communion elements.